Suddenly, Dublin has become a shabby city. Shabby because its centre is peppered with crude concrete structures, flashy mirror glass facades, and other inappropriate schemes which have no connection at all with the spirit of the place. Of course, that was written in an article some time ago in Come Here to Me, although it's now a webpage. And another line from a certain famous city councillor goes, "The culture of culture in Dublin is secretive, nepotistic, childlike, elitist, feeble, spendthrift, and bureaucratic." So, Conor, Dublin City, is it exactly the things described by two very important figures in the kind of construction and study of the, not just the southern city itself, but the Temple Bar area and a lot of the northern developments? Or is Temple Bar and the places we're kind of centralised in lucrative locations which are going to be beneficial to, further pedestrianisation, art and culture? Well, before you even answer that question, we'll talk more on that today on Silent Running with James Van Val and Conor McQuillan. You're on Silent Running with Conor McQuillan and James Van Val, your hosts of this hopefully continuous and inevitable show. Conor, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, we're back today actually from quite a bit of research in the National Library of Ireland to support this episode's kind of theme or structure, which would be around kind of following the exchange, of course, in theme as I've started the show in this period of
limbo.
Yes, limbo period. Silent running, a ship that's on life support with no real centre anymore.
Well, it's kind of limbo in both senses of the word, in that we're in the middle of an ether of nothingness, and that there's a kind of game of limbo going on.
Yes.
How low will we or other people bend to get through the shutters into a building somewhere?
Who's holding the limbo stick, Conor?
Both we are and no one.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Apparently it's us.
Okay, right. So
our own limbo stick. So it's really more somebody holding a spear and trying to dance under it.
It's a brilliant image to start with. So today our study kind of focused around a document which was, well, two in particular. One was a 2004 document that you can find, and we're going to link as well, from Sherwood Associates on the future for Temple Bar, which is an urban framework plan. Again, as I mentioned, from 2004. And the other one was from 1990, right, by E.G. McCarran, who was the then Dublin City Corporation's chief architect, who was designing a kind of renewal plan through a number of surveys for the Temple Bar area.
Yeah.
So what have we kind of come up... We've touched on it a little, but what have we seen so far, Conor? I want it in your words. I want a Northern Irish seriousness to it.
a kind of a northern bleak aspect to it. I think it's fair to say it's not quite how it was envisaged. The cities are inherently experimental, and going back to the quote about cities being mankind's greatest inventions, it's a constant experiment, and things happen or don't happen, and the law of unintended consequences is a constant factor which people can't quite factor in, but kind of have to accept a certain amount of things are going to happen or not happen in ways that they never intended.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're not great Confucius readers, you know. A lot of them haven't really spent that much time in the arts other than to fill out papers, papers being in school. So to come away from what you were just saying there, well, no, to stay on it, but to come away from what I've seen, I'm seeing a number of different pretty comprehensive plans that were quite positive, actually, in it, but pragmatic for the kind of cutting through of certain old sections of Temple Bar just weren't needed anymore. One from the 1990 plan, which came true, which was Temple Street, and they cut a pedestrian alleyway from there, kind of just behind Meeting House Square, but actually within the Market Square, and then cut it across to, where did it end again? Somewhere on the more east side of Temple Bar.
Sycamore Street,
yeah. So things like that, really, really good idea. Further pedestrianization, because there's a huge amount of it was actually marked on the maps that we saw that there's a lot of walking spaces that just aren't being used or haven't been fixed, and they fixed them since. There's positive things that I just didn't quite see. I mean, I'm talking about boring stuff though, like they put more gravel here, and that means I can walk more evenly. And I'm, as an autistic person, I really like that. I like constant evenness. It's not just about that, but it's good to see that there was serious consideration put into the building of these parts of town that beforehand, if you were to look around, just looks like a shitty sack of potatoes all thrown on top of each other, some left behind, some dead car parks, but you could see there was structure there. I just think from what it looks like, it's the same problem that governments have always had, even with the National Development Plan and the roads roads and transport, which is this 4-year cycle thinking, which I know seems stupid now to bring up. It's a very kind of student first year entrenched ideal. I've just learned it, I have to tell everybody, like, it's a 4-year plan. I don't know one notice. Everyone knows it's a psychology of governments, but it's definitely something that's prevalent now from the 1990 era to 2004. That's what changed so much of what the envisioning could have been, which was, again, could have been done, and some of it was, and what it actually became. Yeah. So I definitely think the swapping around from the Hawley era to now kind of changed a lot of the framework for how people were putting money into the area. But anyway.
Yeah, and even the period before that. I mean, throughout the course of the 1980s, the plan for Temple Bar changed hugely. And it was partially because of people's opposition to the top-down plans for the area that things ended up not quite as intended. Of course, the most famous example of that being the CAE bus and train exchange.
Yeah, which we need to get into now, because no one. It's a radio show, so they can't see the grimace and gleam you have looking at me there. Like, the bus exchange. We should talk about that. So, Coruscant per hour in CIE in the 80s, let's say 85 was, let's go mid, but really it was a plan that was started to go through in 88 and 89 because of the buying up of all the pretty cheap spaces in Temple Bar by CAE. They had a plan to turn the whole area into a huge bus depot, bus and train actually, and part of that was to put a train underneath the Liffey and a DART more specifically, an underground DART, like a subway, much like a tube, so that was going to go from Temple Bar to where? Was it going to go to the airport or somewhere?
I'd say probably, yeah.
Yeah. That was one of the proposals. Part of the proposal as well was just to have a huge central location for a number of Dublin buses, which in fairness were going through at a huge proportion. On weekdays it was like something like 200 buses going through the area and crippling these cobblestone roads that were never meant to take such huge weights and suspensions over and over again. And Dublin Bus were having big problems with this, so they were hoping to rebuild a lot of the area and centralize buses in Dublin, and then actually create a better flow of traffic as well as for bus routes for people in Dublin. So there was good intention, but there was also no concern for culture. It was just complete. It was all efficacy of the business and not really much care for in a way that kind of like Madison Square Gardens in the 60s in New York, with kind of trampling over some pretty famous buildings, including of course the was it the Roosevelt building, or was it like a Monument Hotel? I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a number of famous areas. So it's that kind of thinking again, where there's benefit to it, but obviously there's going to be a huge amount of recalcitrance and resistance, and there was from the local members. But that actually, I should point out, this era is what brought about places kind of like the Exchange, because the buying up of all these spaces, as well as no one being able to either necessarily hold it for a huge amount of time, meant that there was very short leases being given out on each of the spaces the CIE owned, and the rent was incredibly low because they could do lots of temporary sellouts or rent outs to people before taking it back and building up the area. So it meant a huge amount of what would have previously been very low income organizations, people who couldn't necessarily afford a space for themselves, could now buy small shops and do what would now be called pop-up, or in some ways I would say some of it was a bit squatty as well, which is buy and stay. And that's kind of how a lot of these cool little things like sword shops and like in these different bohemian stores where they would do tattooing and all these different arts are kind of somewhat artistic and somewhat just selling goods at a really, really crappy level.
Yeah, I mean,
started up.
Some of the big institutions that we see in Temple Bar today, film-based, the Irish Film Institute.
That started there.
You know, a lot of those things started because there was cheap property the CIA had other plans for long-term and didn't mind whatever went in there in the interim. And, you know, it suited arts and cultural organisations because they're often looking for fairly short-term things that suit their resources and the difficulties in long-term planning when you have a project involving volunteers or very low-paid part-time staff. So once that kind of embedded in the area and got comfortable, it became very difficult for CIE to try and sort of tap on everyone's shoulder and say, yeah, you know, that was temporary, right?
Because they'd actually embedded it people who are now communicating, networking, were giving each other food from certain shops. They were doing health food centres. Film base was then, you know, if it wasn't the students there providing film spots and filming locations that would have been really, really expensive before, but now they could do cheaply and promote a lot of small artists or individuals who couldn't afford, who didn't have a forum for their projects. So it started to coalesce and benefit one another, and each one was sharing, and natural business comes about. You know, commerce was flowing. They all had the colour of gold, and that kind of that actually built up and established enough of a resistant force who wanted that area to stay as cultural and as well as endemic to the kind of grey bricked but classic cobblestone medieval nature of Temple Bar, because that's what sewed them together in the sense of history. So you had all these people that were essentially planted there to resist CIE, and CIE facilitated that by mistake by allowing them all to buy up these spaces, and that's what led to I think it was a great resistance movement. That then I quoted him earlier. It was who was it? Frank, the great environmentalist. Yeah, Frank MacDonald, the then environmentalist editor, and he's still an editor of not an editor but writer of the Irish Times, who helped kind of telegraph and write the movement and give a number of op-eds on it that supported a number of the people in the Temple Bar area, as well as talking about the grey enmeshment of the city, which is what I just quoted a moment ago from not so long ago. He's still writing about Temple Bar in that way, as well as Dublin City. So they thankfully were able to build up enough of a public stink. They were able to make enough of a smell that CIA were like, oh, you know what, we're never going to do this in the first place. A dart under the river? What are you, fucking stupid? No, Jesus, what? How are you even going to get under the Liffey? What are you talking about? This is not London. That's not the Thames. What is wrong with you? Okay, that conversation, I was never there. I was never privy to it. No fly in the wall documentation there. I'm just assuming it was probably some realization that this is...
quotation marks in that.
Absolutely. It's all paraphrasing from my best mates. No, it was a stupid thing. And I think the resistance was enough to make them stop it. You know what? I think they really wanted to do it. They would have gone the Market Square Garden route and just ploughed ahead. But development was so slow back then, and Ireland had a much more stiff development process for private companies and for state bodies as well, who had to account for a lot of their plantation and had to account for a lot of their surveys of the sites. So things were much more, you couldn't be as quick as you could be in New York, you know, in any of the boroughs. So yeah, it was it's an interesting period, and I just think it's good to mention that if you ever want to think about why Temple Bar kind of is the way it is now, it was kind of CIE's unintentional fault.
well I don't know if you would use the word fault or blame, but I would certainly say that. Yeah, I would certainly say that the area isn't currently what anyone planned it to be.
Yeah.
You know, you can't look back 10 or 15 or 20 years ago and say that the area is today what it was planned to be. And it's one of those areas that is particularly high profile in Dublin.
Yeah.
And sticking to the plan has not been particularly easy.
Yeah.
Because the different groups of artists or businesses that have gone into Temple Bar, 15, 20 years ago, is probably when it started to become a hotbed for pubs to go in, knowing that there was kind of an interesting cultural quarter going on. Pubs and hotels started to open in ways they wouldn't have 30 years ago. So the different waves of people coming in have actually become very interestingly resistant to change from the generation coming in after them. And there's all sorts of echoes
of that even now, even with how the Exchange established itself, and the local businesses around there, some of older ownership, and definitely people in their 60s and 70s who were, let's be honest, a bit gnarly, a bit they were pretty reckless about how they talked about us, but in a way that was kind of just like accepted. Okay, you don't understand our business model, or we don't have a business model, and that in itself is something that you don't understand. And
but what if 30 years ago, whenever they moved to the area?
Absolutely, which was it was a bohemian space. Not to say that we're bohemian, but we took on definitely our flat hierarchy was much more bohemian in nature than anything else that we did. Although we're not Donovan, Jesus, we're not going to go to fucking India or talk to Maharaji or anything. But yeah, it was a really, really great thing to have come about from something that could have been terrible for the area. I think fantastic for bus routes, which would have saved me a lot of time as well in the city. But it's not so much about the efficiency of my life individually to get to my work. And it's again back to that thinking we complained about on a small documentary that might never come out with those two French ladies, those lovely girls, one of which is named
one French called Elsa, who's
an intern of the exchange,
and Marie is Brazilian.
Mm-hmm. Which is the concern. I mean, people used to split it up. I'm not going to try and quote any sociologist, but I think that I've heard a number of lines about organicism versus individualism, which is like the individual and what about me and my benefits and how I can build for my own lifestyle and my own small circuit and my own family. And then the person who wants to engage fully with the open society, knowing he has a consequence and on every front, but then kills too much of his identity. What's his individual circuit, or what's his individual run? So it's less about that now and more about this privatization of people's lives. And I think that's definitely there in Dublin. It has been for some time now. We talked about this as private bubbles. People in their own little bubbles that they want catered to in the best way possible by all small services that happen to get them to their job, that happen to get them to their one thing in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the apartment blocks that have been built in Temple Bar and a few other places in Dublin, are quite new developments for Ireland, actually. I mean, when you look at the oldest buildings that we have in Dublin, they would be the 5 Georgian squares. So Mountjoy, Parnell, Fitzwilliam, Stephen's Green, and Marion. So those squares were primarily private gardens in the middle of townhouses for very wealthy individuals, but they were at least outward facing. Whereas what we have now is apartment blocks that are very much inward facing. And that's actually, it's an interesting aspect of walking around a lot of European cities, that actually you see these huge apartment blocks that are kind of almost ecosystems within themselves.
Yeah, no, completely.
And huge towering walls on the outside, massive gates that keep everyone else out, and there's
their own small local governance in a way. They have their own power structure, their own building managers, and then their own building judges, and whatever it may be, and they run and function through that more daily than we would ever attend yearly any of our own governance on a higher level.
Yeah, but I mean the balance to that provided in European cities is that many more European cities have open outdoor squares and large pedestrian areas in the ways that we really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the famous examples, the likes of Leicester Square, Champs-Élysées.
Champs-Élysées,
the 2 squares, Alexanderplatz and Potsdamer in Berlin. Large open civic squares. Now, they're taken over for festivals.
There's Italy as well in Rome. I don't want to say the Romana, but there's a number of locations that are open market squares there.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the Piazza Navona.
That's it, yeah. Which every year has a fair. I mean, I think is it Piazza Navona a celebration or fair or celebrating some saint? Is it? I can't remember. Either way, it's a very public event.
Yeah, most of the squares in Rome have huge churches. There are the 4 basilicas. Mary Majors, John Lateran's, Peter and Paul outside the wall in the Vatican, and the huge public squares associated with them. So I suppose in Rome, the public squares were kind of a grand statement about the church, that there was an open civic plaza around them, and you see that in Paris with Notre Dame and cathedrals in Barcelona, Santiago de Compostela. So kind of a lot of public space in the European context, I guess, is
it's ecumenical in nature.
Yeah, by virtue of the church and the idea that there should be a grand public square through which people could see the glory of the cathedrals towering towards the heavens or something.
Yeah, fair enough that they let them get to see it though, right?
Yeah, but we didn't have that here. We had Christchurch and St. Patrick's that were taken over after the Reformation. And there was a kind of a privatization of the space around them. They were fenced off from the people because the population of Dublin around them was not really of that church. the Church of Ireland. So that space kind of never really became used civic space. Although St. Patrick's is a bit more, but only in the sense that it's a bit like a state garden somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, it's somewhere nice for tourists to go, or somebody
Absolutely.
to go for
Open
big
gardens
event.
and some murals, and well, not murals, but there's busts and like there's monument kind of bronze gilded planted little sections where they talk about certain famous poets and contributors to Ireland's culture.
Yeah.
Or more writing, but yeah.
And I suppose around parliaments as well. Most parliaments or parliament buildings in Europe, think of Westminster, or the Reichstag, the Bundestag, sorry. Well, the Reichstag building with the Bundestag within it. You know, they have huge public squares around them, whereas we have a parliament building that is fenced off, and part of it is used for a car park.
Yeah. And even then, very few cars fill it up. And most of the time, the only people waiting outside those buildings are RTE vans.
Yeah. So I mean, we've always been quite, I think,
passive and private, maybe in the way we've constructed our city, and the way in which we seem to design ourselves around information, or like not just information but service. You know, we don't look necessarily for public open squares and government services. This is a very thing that Mr. Haskins, again, founder of the Exchange, was pushing for when he was doing the kind of using the anonymous scheme at the time, which anonymous being the group of users, usually 4chans and other chans and places like that, who were fighting against what they saw as evils through using denial of service and other internet attacks, so using their cyber friendly skills to basically be, you know, hacking terrorists. But the scheme to put like a mask on your face, either of Guy Fawkes or someone else, and Haskins had that big event where they all went to funnily enough, Temple Bar Square, Meeting House Square, and they put their they all took masks on, and then he was one of the first to take the mask off as the idea and say, well, this is who I really am, but we can all hide ourselves as well, but also I'm totally the one who took his mask off, so like look at me, I'm the author of this brilliant event. But he was good for that though, and that was an interesting event to show that people do want to discuss the even the governments of the smallest things, such as like, what are we going to do with the buildings in this area? Yeah, you know, how are people going to be represented? The youth are misrepresented. I'm not saying that myself. That's just that was the tagline, I think, of that movement.
Well, I mean, the very title of that week of talks and programmed events is the city fit for purpose?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you look at Meeting Square now, it again is a space that was meant to be public and it's been closed off. It's got massive gates around the outside now. So that space, again, while the intention was to have a kind of an open civic plaza where people could meet and talk and think and philosophize al fresco, it's been privatized again. And in the evenings there are massive fences.
So your choices to where to move is now more early bird, is that what you're saying? You're stuck to a set menu.
Well, it's there's something very profoundly disappointing about the fact that we don't have a nice open square where people can meet.
There is, but to play devil's advocate for a moment, you look at how they rerouted some of Grafton Street a while ago. I was there at 11 in the evening on a Saturday, maybe 3 weeks ago, because there was a huge party event that was going on inside that small private club that you can sometimes cut into on the right hand side if you're coming from the Lewis tracks and St. Stephen's Green. You're walking down Grafton Street, and then a sudden turn to the right will bring down this strange alleyway where at the end there's a club, and they were putting different barriers up to move people in and out of that club, some members, some not. And you look at other events there in Temple Bar, and a while ago they actually closed off a huge amount of the section, not just for the parade, but later on that night for different parties that were spreading out into the streets. And I look at that and think, well, you're breaking public access. This isn't just semi-public in its declaration. These parts are delegated and declared as public, not just semi-public. And there's a big debate over that legality. And it should be people. I should be able to walk out. I should be able to take my girlfriend here, whoever here, and I should be able to cut down here. But then to play devil's advocate, I remember the city's broke. The city is broke, and these private parties and these big entities who just want to have a lovely old building or a Georgian slice to themselves, slice of Georgian pizza, they're going to pay quite a huge amount of money, and they don't even consider it exorbitant to buy some of these spaces and have cool parties and cut off parts of the street to do their own special events that have very little public input. And you know what? That's not necessarily something I wouldn't, if I was either someone in charge of that, an area manager dealing with those things, I would understand the need to take money on that level. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously a need for, businesses to make money and the city council to facilitate that. You know, the city is driven by commerce. I suppose the concern is that does that start to erode the rights of other people to that space?
temporarily is, I think, how they would see it. Temporary erosion of rights.
Hopefully only temporary, but and something done in agreement with people and not with the understanding that, we're doing these things to make it easier for this business to make money or whatever, but it's still a public street. I think the concern is where, a number of the laneways around Temple Bar in particular have essentially become private service access. That it's only the bins or the lorries that are dropping stuff off that are really able to use those laneways.
It's the same laneways that we were reading in the proposal they were going to open up to pedestrianisation.
Well, that's why Dublin City Council is now looking at the Love the Lanes initiative.
Love the Lanes, yeah.
Try and encourage some sort of pop-up events or some sort of art installations to try and make those laneways more livable and make them more attractive to people to walk down. I mean, what they ultimately need is for people to be attracted into those laneways to see or do something, so that there is a sense that they're still public access. Otherwise, what you end up with is eventually the public right of way is eroded, and entire streets that we used to be able to walk on become closed off, and people put up fences and.
Well, it's something that's already happened anyway to a huge proportion of Temple Bar, which at the same time is growing outwards, left and right, as we were looking today at the older maps. Yeah. It used to be a much smaller part of Wellington Quay, is now part of Wood Quay, and now going as well more, I would say, it's going more west. No, more east as well as west, I should say.
Yeah, no, the cut-off used to be very defined as Parliament Street and...
Haslington Street, or what's it called?
Anglesey.
Anglesey Street, that's it.
Yeah. And I think the bigger plans for encroachment on the areas around them succeeded in the West End with the opening of a few pubs at the West End of Temple Bar and Field around College Green. You might remember about 6-7 years ago there was a plan for 3 Foster Place, a building owned by Trinity College, to have entrances both into Foster Place and into the back of Anglesey Street. Or perhaps one of the laneways off that, I can't remember. With the idea being that it would be some sort of super pub with entrances.
Super pub.
Yeah, with entrances on both sides. I mean, it's a wonderful building. It used to be owned by, I think, one of the banks around there. And it's, fantastic interiors, plasterwork walls and all sorts of gilded and fine wood furnishings, and it probably looks a bit like the bank on Dame Street.
Plush and old and like old. You'd have denturing in the bricks and the kinds of things that come with very bespoke structures that you couldn't afford anymore. But
it's an absolutely wonderful building inside.
Kind of as gorgeous as the library was today, by the way.
Yeah,
did you notice that the roof above us, that kind of to refer back to basilicas, that dome structure above us was gorgeous. Did you see that?
Yeah.
It was the way they've molded that, the way they molded in the kind of the paint on top of some of the plaster there is fantastic. Yeah. I wouldn't say there's any plaster at all. Actually, it's just classic brick or stone. It's a wonderful building. But this building was Trinity we're going to use it as a kind of an opening to
Elder Street. And the reason that was kind of supported by certain aspects of the Temple Bar properties was that it would be a bit of a widening, I suppose, of the Temple Bar area, and would allow them to come into the very salubrious surroundings of Foster Place and College Green and suddenly having access to a huge amount of tourists walking up and down Dame Street. Wouldn't necessarily turn left onto Anglesey Street or Crow Street because they are quite narrow streets. So if they had a more kind of attractive entrance into Temple Bar through a huge super pub or somewhere that was doing open, lunch in the afternoon.
Yeah, again, centre around food and drink, though.
Yeah. Particularly in some sort of fancy surroundings. I think the idea at one point was for Witherspoons, that huge chain of pubs in the UK. What they've done in a lot of cities is take quite interesting fancy old buildings around, say, St George's Market in Glasgow, and turn them into really quite fancy oldie worldy pubs.
Yeah.
It just happened to be part of a relatively modern super chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that
Bewley's kind of did that as well with the revamp of that hotel just up in Grafton Street to capture a lot of the old world effects. So roll out the dark burgundy carpets and keep it very, very low lit, and use some of the classic lamps, but actually replace the chandelier bulbs with much more modern bulbs. And the tricks they pull, it's very good though.
To drape themselves in the veneer of history.
Yeah, into a kind of a 19th century upper class look. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that didn't work because at that point people kind of realised, well, hold on a second, Temple Bar is going to start creeping into College Green. And that spill out from Temple Bar up Fleet Street into Westmoreland Street is already something that I think most people would say doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
I mean, around there you have essentially just only three kinds of you just like at the ground floor. You have tourist shops, you have a couple of gambling places, and you've convenience stores. And Starbucks then, and the money exchange.
Yeah, but all servicing wonderful addictions that make life very fun and distracting. You know, throwing down on horses and dogs, failing over and over again, using the last of it to drown out the sorrows with some drink, maybe a couple of Mars bars. Who knows? Yeah. You know, that happens to just be my churning cycle. But it's certainly not a great use right now of the area. It's not something you want to necessarily tip into with more cultural aspects like Temple Bar. But especially
if you look at the upper floors of the buildings. I mean, some of the
a lot of them which were vacant. I was going to say naked. They are naked. There's nothing in them. They're bare, left.
But they're really wonderful buildings from different architectural periods. And yet the ground floor units, are draped in some sort of neon.
Bzz. Yeah. Bzz. Yeah. Absolutely open. Zaytoon. Actually, Zaytoon's great.
Yeah, Zaytoon's alright.
Yeah. Obviously, they get to go because it's a personal preference I ate there. So all of a sudden, let's just change based on our favoritism. So, yeah, you mentioned that Westmoreland Street and Fleet Street was a place they're pushing to, but I remember from the survey we're reading today, a huge proportion of traffic, if you look at the flow, at the time in 1990 and then up to 4, and then I think maybe a little bit in now as well from 2008 onwards, the traffic was flowing from one side on Parliament Street, turning right, or turning left. Either way, it was usually right because they're only coming one way from Dame Street. They come on from Parliament Street and cut through the centre of Temple Bar, going left to right, and they would drive from there to get usually to Westmoreland Street. And some of the popular bus routes would come through Essex Street to try and do the same thing. All of them are cutting through Temple Bar, but it's usually Parliament Street and Essex Street being the only two main roads really, or supportive roads for huge amount of traffic, and one bus route, pretty major bus route, to get a lot of people from the two market districts. So one up on Westmoreland Street, which is where they want to get to, and then some from further back on south side of Dublin. So I'm thinking towards from Grafton Street. So it's just two huge shopping districts where there's a cultural centre with low order and kind of things in between. So to facilitate that, they wanted to open up for a while kind of the roads a little bit, just to cut them back somewhat to allow more traffic to come through. So there already was a huge flow of traffic, in like just cars and people in these two specific areas through Temple Bar just to get to Westmoreland Street and Fleet Street. So that makes sense that they would spill out there.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think what one of the mistakes they probably made is that the amount of traffic going through College Green. And I think that there is the plan now to rectify that and pedestrianise College Green.
You okay with that?
I think I am actually. Yeah. I mean, it'll just be the buses and taxis and the tourists going through. I think car traffic really is something that doesn't add to the city centre. So if you can kind of push that around a little bit towards the quays. Yeah. I mean, I'll still go across, I assume, at Parliament Street and Essex Bridge, and then can go along Ormond Quay from there. Yeah. So there'll still be a kind of circular round route around the kind of city centre passageway from Grafton Street up Westmoreland Street to O'Connell Street. But I think visually it'll be much nicer.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, let's just visualize that for a while. Any listeners, just visualize, the change of traffic flows is going to fix this one minor aspect.
It's not going to fix it, but
no, it's going to fix nothing. But College Green, you really want that? I mean, you're a Trinity student, right? I mean, I just didn't think you'd want. How am I trying to put this without suggesting snobbery or anything like that? Well, clearly you've just shown that you like it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's something that you're in support of. It's because you want to curtail some of the traffic flow that's going to centre forward at the moment. You want them to kind of curl out onto the edges a little bit more.
Well, I think, it does two things. It encourages people to actually use public transport more. Suddenly, if you want to go to Dame Street, College Green, or Collins Street, you'd pretty much have to use a bus or be prepared to be dropped off and parked somewhere on a small ring road around that. And for the majority of people, that's a perfectly viable option. So I think they should take it. And if we can encourage people, who are just going into town to do a small amount of shopping and messages and meet people, they can use public transport. That takes cars off the road. It encourages, green policies in a somewhat...
Yeah, and that it just reverses the fucking carbon dioxide benzene chugging to just a slightly better or a slightly shittier part of the city.
Yeah.
While the lovelier part can have it less stained on its walls.
There is a bit too much traffic on Dame Street for it to be a proper kind of main thoroughfare.
Yeah. Yeah, do you think it should? I mean, I know it was actually in its intention a long time ago, was it actually a thoroughfare, a big shitty muddy thoroughfare. But do you think that's what they want it to be now? I don't see the city having a design necessarily for Dame Street besides what it already, what's already there, yeah. I don't see any, because there needs to be one landmark or opening building that just isn't some buffet or some interesting play on what's that food, that falafel houses they're having there. There needs to be something. They usually use a landmark of new beacon idea that lets you know that, they're going to open this part of the city up. There's something happening here. But to move on, another thing.
Exchange.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We have the new exchange. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to call it that as well. But then it just ends up being a student exchange program. Just another illegal one that's slightly owned by the state this time.
Yeah, you're going to make money somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. We just take in students and feed them and let them go to their schools. Well, actually secretly working around the corner.
Yeah, just running sweatshops.
Oh, God. Dangerous territory. So, yeah, or just continuous boring territory. I am interested, though, in... I bring up traffic, and I think you make a good point as well about the College Green is because this was a huge issue for London until the congestion charge came in and not solved the problem, but certainly tipped it in such a way that no one could complain about it in the same way, because one region started to complain about it while another one stopped. That's kind of what happens as well in a lot of the governments or the governance of England, particularly with London. Although London is taken care of by a much bigger local government organisation, the London Planners and things like that. It's much bigger because it's huge. But the rest of the country has small local government members, and they'll have their members, well, not members of parliament, but they'll have their equivalent of TDs, and they'll have their local heads, and will become MPs, hopefully some of them. And then you go to them and you'll say, I'm going to be out of work for a certain amount of time, and they'll literally pay you it's a much more direct. You go to your own council. It's a very, very nice system. It's something that my boss actually lived under in Birmingham. That was lovely, where he went missing for 3 weeks. He said to them, he applied for a type of welfare, said that he didn't have a job, and they left money on his door even though they wasn't reporting it anymore, and they kept just paying him anyway. Wow. And after 3 weeks they gave him a warning that they wouldn't, which is really kind of nice. It's like, look, you're not here, we can't just pay nobody. It's Birmingham was like that too. But looking back at London, what you usually do is you shift the problem onto another district that's not as important. It's a bit like gerrymandering, but not quite gerrymandering. It's basically you take the high pollers and the elitist kind of types, and you say, okay, well they're heavily in support of my campaign, so as a TD I'm going to clean up this part of the area and fix some of their problems if there's enough of them complaining, and then just push it onto another area. It's kind of like if you remember what happened in Temple Bar with all these taxis that came into a huge flow because we diverted traffic. Well, I say I had nothing to do with it.
It's not only that. I mean, the taxi problem around town is primarily because that's what most people are in town for, is to drink, and they really can't drive home. Yeah, nor
do we trust them to. Yeah, we'd much rather some of these unlicensed guys just drive them and overcharge them by 40 quid by taking them on the motorway, doubling the fucking charge as they speed up.
They have less to spend on and drink it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you want them stalking you on the way home, begging you to get into the car, which is overtly creepy as well as desperate for the business. You ever had that? Taxi driver basically say, please get in.
Yeah, that is very, very strange.
Yeah, it's actually happened to me. Yeah, it happens in Stepaside too. I go far back as that, and I've had taxi drivers just stop on the road at 2 a.m. because I walk everywhere. Yeah. And I walk home very, very late, and I'm perfectly happy and contented doing it. I have a lot to listen to. Very cultured man. So as I was walking back, listening to whatever it was I was listening to, probably Johann Brahms, and they stopped. A guy stops, rolls down the window. I'm not going to say what ethnicity. Well, he was probably white. And he was shouting something along the lines of, like, you got to get in. It's too late. It's too dangerous to be around here. And I went, how is it dangerous to be around one of the most safest suburban territories in southern Dublin? Basically Wicklow. Are you sure it's dangerous? Because
the drums, they're coming.
dun, 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 dun. I said, I'm going to go home. And he said, no, you got to get in. He kept saying, like, you got to get in. It really kind of freaked me out. And I'm thinking the only person right now who has a high potential of assaulting me is you. You know, you're the only person who's freaking me out right now. I was not freaked out until you came along and existed with your taxi. Yeah. You should keep going. Not to just go by that cognitive bias or that specious logic of, well, before you were here, there was no problem. But there really wasn't. So I get a lot of that. And I think people in the city had such a big problem with that at a council meeting that myself and Conor attended once. And this is very funny. In that I've just ruined it. It's not funny, but I'll preemptively say it is. We went to this council meeting and we had people complaining about the number of taxis that were, I think what was the line? Oh yeah, begging them to get into the taxis. There was a number of taxis asking for business and beeping their horns and interrupting the local daily, whatever the fuck it was these people were doing, selling of flowers and different things like that. And these business owners were saying, well, I don't want to be hounded. My customers are being hounded. Stop these taxis. And they were complaining about it, saying, what are we going to do about these taxis? To fucking Dublin City councillors. They were saying, what are we going to do about it? What are they going to do about it? What were they going to do about taxis? Seriously, what are they going to do? Well, I could go and find, a PD, a classic PD backbencher who still hates taxis and get them to deregulate them or regulate them. Well, what do you want me to do? Like, there's nothing I can do. Like, what if someone comes to you as well and your council, your power is pretty minimal. And no offense, great people, sure. But you show up to them and you say, a perfectly private business next door every once a month hammers a bit too loudly. What are you going to do about that? That's the equivalent of that. What the fuck are they going to do? There's nothing.
Well, this again gets back to the point of the quote about cities being experiments, and people have to learn to get along with certain things next door that will annoy them. I mean, whenever I go into the bus at night, the person sitting next to me might smell bad, or they might talk to themselves, or they might be a bit drunk, or they might be a bit weird, or they might be a bit overweight and taking over,
all right, calm down. I'm not that bad. All right, just fucking relax. Whoa.
I just had to say.
Couldn't hold it in anymore. You slipped it in with the passenger beside you.
We have all sorts of kind of small annoyances that we can either let go of and live with, or we can allow to kind of become something that we become focused on, and the annoyance is then exaggerated by the focus bias.
Yeah. But that's not going to happen anytime. That rapid evolution to that very particular state, which right now is wholly subjective to the way we're perceiving it. Not subjective in that it's not a reality that couldn't exist, but more subjective in that the way we're talking about it has too much of an acute focus on this person could be less annoyed with this person. In other words, it's not any grand ideology. But let's just say that what I was going towards was that the complaining of the taxis came from a number of members who was wasting council. They were wasting council meeting time. That was my biggest problem with them. But they were referring to an actual problem, which was a huge rerouting of traffic through Temple Bar that was causing a lot of bottlenecking. And it was because there was what road was it again? You'll get this right. It wasn't the North Parliament Street Road, was it? It was some road coming in from one of the quays.
Exchange Street Lower.
Exchange Street Lower, and they diverted traffic there because there was 2 deaths or 3 deaths, or 3 people had been knocked over there. Either way, Management at the time Management replied saying, well, we had to divert traffic there because there was a number of car accidents and some deaths in that area. Oh. And well, he didn't say specifically deaths, but he was saying a number of accidents.
Oh no, this is Wellington Quay onto.
That's one of 2 though, isn't it? Because there was 2 diversions.
Yeah, because that used to be a left-hand turn, and then it became one way across Essex Street.
Mm-hmm. And that caused a number of these issues, which is a huge amount of taxis now coming from much further into town where there's like bigger roads and bringing people back into the southern parts of the city. So he was saying we can't do that because we've already rerouted this part, essentially. I really wanted to say at the time, I wanted to be that kind of cheeky, obvious little shit who said, yeah, it's almost like when you change one thing in a traffic ecosystem, it changes a whole other set of things. It's almost like if you divert this part of traffic, now these people over here get affected. What is that about? As I move my hands up and down in a balance. What's this thing? Balance. It is the short-term consideration that they had to make. And you know what? I probably could have made the decision that much easier. I'm sure if I was stuck in their position. You know what? Fuck them. I'm not empathizing with them. Fuck them. They messed up. That was a stupid decision.
Yeah, no, there's all sorts of, again, unintended consequences of shifting things around and not really knowing how that's going to interact with different things, even a block away.
Yeah. I think with that particular meeting, it galvanized my perception of a lot of the business owners in the area, which is, yes, to own a business and to start one up, to have all of their safeties cleared and to be selling like they're selling, to keep going, it's brilliant and it's admirable and it's commendable. On the smallest levels, it really is. And it's something that I've never quite experienced. I mean, we have the Exchange, but I've never been that kind of business owner. And I fair credit to all of them, but I still kind of come out of it thinking, fucking idiots. I still feel I should not be thinking that at 23. If people are much older than me, I shouldn't have that pomposity, and I don't want to, because I'm sure they're much smarter in their disciplines, and ultimately there's no real scale of intelligence here. It's not about throwing together IQ tests and assuming some genetic faculty of like, oh, well, he's stupider than this person. It's just these people should be more aware of their surroundings, and they know the city better than I do, yet they don't seem to know how cities run. Taxis coming through one area because the diversion of traffic is just going to keep happening. Returning each week to a council meeting and saying it is not going to change shit. In fact, a lot of these guys were quite young, some of the business owners, and I think maybe that's because this is their first time getting the curveball of getting hit with the curveball of there's all these kids, don't know where they came from, and they're like walking in front of my store and they look a bit meh, and they smell a bit and they're carrying drinks, and I remember when I was a kid I saw a drink and it meant evil, and I don't want them here. Get rid of them.
I drank in fields.
Why couldn't they drink in fields? Why aren't they in fucking fields? What are they doing in the city? Fields? Yeah, where are they getting all this alcohol from? Actually, no, I revoked the question. I retract that question. Where are they getting all this alcohol from? Yeah, it's back to the private bubble thing we're talking about, and it can even happen with local business owners. Business owners should be much better at mediating the more holistic and heuristic elements of a city, of people communicating, because they're dependent on suppliers, they're dependent on talking to one another, dependent on watching one another. They're sharing same building lots. You would expect it from them, and yet they come in and complain in such an individual and myopic way. It's just like, there needs to be cleaner. Like, my street's not clean. There's still cardboard outside. And I didn't want to be that Republican guy. Said I didn't want to be at the time I was very conservative, but I didn't want to be the American Republican who said, clean up your fucking self. Just go outside and clean your own street. They do it in America all the time. Yeah. Go out and clean your own street.
And there is something admirable about that mentality that the Americans have.
Yeah.
But, it shouldn't be left up to your government or city council.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not libertarian, but it's certainly closer to it. It's a more independent aspect of being in control of your local physical environment. Like, this is geography, you're right beside it, you can change that. Yeah. To expect to go through this bureaucratic layer to make someone maybe bring one cleaning truck of this miserable Lithuanian guy who goes and drives slowly with his Bushnell truck coming down the street going, there we go, once there's that street done, now back to slowly go back to the Grafton Street to clean that again. It's just ridiculous. That's just what a terrible expectation of any bureaucratic agency, especially just for your street. Yeah. I mean, the thinking doesn't go in there to, well, what does that mean for anyone else who uses the same cleaning equipment? Because there's not new trucks bought for your request. If you're not having your street cleaned for the first time in a year, you can bet that's diverting off another street. That's just how it works. Again, a consideration that's easily made. It's an equation I can do in my head very quickly, and I don't own a business. So I don't know if it's maybe that I'll grow up and I'll figure out that this is the way the world, I'm supposed to be this way, or not that there's a supposed to, but there's a closer to being ignorant that you're supposed to have, or that you should be more individualistic in your concerns. Maybe that's what the secret of this world is. I'm supposed to be like that, but I definitely found that very disheartening.
Yeah.
Just put it that way.
Yep. Well, it's true wherever you are, but no man is an island. Particularly holds true in the city centre. You have to realise that there are neighbours
except
all
for
around.
Bob
There are neighbours all around you, and you either accept that you have to put up with the inconveniences and annoyances and ticks and quirks of people around you, or you go off to the middle of Cork somewhere and find somewhere that you don't have to interact with people.
Yeah. I mean, there's great places in Cork to do that. There's where's that one that Dan goes to all the time? Not Glenross or wherever it is. It's
I don't know.
Oh, what's it called? It's like Shutter Island in Cork. It's where all the crazies go, and you'll find like arms experts and stuff who just hang out there because it's such a dead end little place. Oh, where does it go? The Costigan's go there. It's a great little. It doesn't matter. Either way, there's parts of West Cork you can definitely hide out in. No one's gonna even care to drive down and find you. It's too miserable and lonely and isolated. So yeah, if you want to go on the isolation front, you can. Sadly though, that's just not a. There is no. We can't send people there. We're stuck with them now. And I'm not just referring to the elderly. Yeah, we're going to move on in a moment, but I wanted to talk more about the exchange, because again, in this show, we should focus on that more so. But I do want to get back into Temple Bar later on, because a lot of the history of this really is to kind of build up a preface and a pretext to the way things are now. And as you said yourself, you've seen I think the exchange being a microcosm of a series of events they're anaphora to all the things that have happened with the Temple Bar up to this point. And we're going to get into that as time goes on. But right now, before I play a song, we're going to talk about just a little bit of the functioning of the exchange. I mean, I asked you last week how you guys are facilitating. You said you have a site where you're still able to find spaces for some of the different groups who work through the exchange, and you're also able to get members to gather in the lab and places like that. But how's that been going? Has there been any changes in that area?
Yeah, we've used the lab on Foley Street to meet on Wednesdays, and thankfully that is something that we've kept going throughout the 2 month period. So there has been a continuity of the Wednesday meetings going back, apart from Christmas, for 5 years now. And it's good that link is maintained. Because at the very most basic level, Exchange was about the idea of people getting in a room together and working out how they were going to share space. So a microcosm of what we hope the local council and local areas and neighbourhoods do all the time is talk to each other and find out, okay, how can we live together and share this place. So we've kept that going without a physical space to actually run events. What we've tended to try and do is talk to the groups that still come to us, looking for bookings and try and find them space somewhere else. Now that has meant small community centres and leisure centres in different parts of Dublin. It's meant that some of the events have moved to other places. Even some pubs have started to do some of the dance events, and some of the gigs that were meant to be on. Unfortunately, the vast majority of things have actually just cancelled, which really kind of shows that Exchange provided something
other than just space location. Yeah.
Well, there was an aspect, an aspect of it which was the ease of access. That actually, for a lot of different projects, it was the difference between happening and not happening. Particularly, we could see in the Exchange, a lot of the groups and individuals who came to us needed that sense of support at the Wednesday meeting, or from volunteers to actually push on and bring something to fruition.
Absolutely. And a lot of them wouldn't even be able to action it without a volunteer coming up and speaking for it first. I do remember this.
So I think having lost that and that public aspect to the meetings, that probably has been the difference between quite a few things happening and not happening.
Yeah, okay. Well, all right. Well, I'm going to go on a break now. I'm going to let you get some water. Or more specifically, I'm going to take the signal that Conor gives, which is coughing, which means he needs a drink because of his massive alcoholism. Not to mention that I have to apologise for the cough. He is going through AIDS at the moment. So it does cause these little outbreaks of the rhinovirus in a rapid state. Although, in my defence, I also have a huge cough at the moment. So I could just as easily be diagnosed with this ridiculous disease. Okay, so I'm going to move into Not Dark Yet with Bob Dylan, and we'll be back on shortly.
Shadows are falling, and I've been here all day. It's too hot to sleep, and time is running away. Feel like my soul has turned into steel. I've still got the scars that the sun didn't heal. There's not even room enough to be anywhere. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. And my sense of humanity has gone down the drain. Behind every beautiful thing, there's been some kind of pain. She wrote me a letter, and she wrote it so kind. She put down in writing what was in her mind. I just don't see why I should even care. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. And I've been to London, and I've been to Gay Mary. I followed the river, and I got to the sea. I've been down on the bottom of a world full of lies. I ain't looking for nothing in anyone's eyes. Sometimes my burden is more than I can bear. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. I was born here and I'll die here against my will. I know it looks like I'm moving, but I'm standing still. Every nerve in my body is so naked and numb. I can't even remember what it was I came here to get away from. Don't even hear the murmur of a prayer. It's not dark yet, and it's getting there.
And we're back on silent running. And so is Dan. Hey, Dan. He's in the room as well. We're happy to always... Absolutely. It's not at all us skipping over our own radio show to talk to people outside of the actual microphones. I just always like to recognise people in here. So yeah, we were talking momentarily just about the running of the Exchange now, but you had a coughing fit that we had to take care of.
Sorry.
There's fish. Yeah, it's okay. Well, you got your drink now, so it's fine. That's water. That is sparkling water. But to go back to how I started with, I opened with two kind of dramatic quotes about the state of not just Temple Bar, but Dublin City, the city centre, from two pretty important figures, one of which was, as I said, a councillor who I'm not going to name, even though he's quoted quite happily in this village, in the Village magazine article. So, if, I'll give you a link or whatever, you can look at it, because, he put himself there. I just feel like saying his name is still somehow taboo, like a bit like the Voldemort name. Oh, shit, I said his name. Yeah. I think that's the fear. I can't really explain it so much as I don't have a fear of saying it, but I don't really want to be associated. I don't want to associate the Exchange with the people who call him out on any particular issue right now in newspapers or magazines. Even though he's said these things, we'll do that. I'll do that later, because the Exchange right now is in this really it's a bit of turbitude. I mean, you're in this very delicate position where you can't state obvious facts all the time about certain members of either whether it be DCC, whether it be just city councillors in general, the city council, or whether it be not that you're dealing with the arts department, but they are the art department, just like the arts council, were huge investors in the Temple Bar area. They currently are the people who fund most of the buildings and most of the functioning of it that isn't entirely private.
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really careful. As I said, turbitude, you have to just be a little bit delicate about what anything the Exchange says on a public level could infer an insult or an attack on these people, which means nothing in terms of, it's not slander or libel, nothing like that. They've all been quoted. It's just that it means on the actual working level with them, you've insulted them, and that's going to completely change their emotional state when looking at you next and thinking, no, well, maybe I won't support you, or maybe you won't need this lab anymore, or if you don't like me so much, meh.
Oh, well, facts are a very dangerous thing. And,
yeah.
Truth is a very in-demand commodity. And
it is. It can be easily weaponized.
Quite expensive on occasion.
Yeah. But
people don't necessarily want to hear the bald facts.
Mm-hmm. They don't. The bald facts. See, that in itself is a brilliant reference, but you'll know at some point why that's funny. That right now has to be stupid inside jokes. So I open with these dramatic quotes because this is the way in which a number of formative people in journalism as well as in the development of the city see things as it is, as of 2004 and now. So from this redevelopment period in 2004 and right now, where it remains pretty much in a similar state with just with a few additions. So what do you think? I mean, do you agree with those statements about kind of, with respect to Temple Bar, do you agree with those statements about Dublin City?
I think those statements could be said about most cities.
Yes.
Most cities are riven with all sorts of mistakes and battles and rivalries and I suppose the central theme of this show is, one of the accusations, for want of a better word, levelled against the Exchange was that it was never a part of the plan, that it was always meant to be temporary. And what we're saying is actually what Temple Bar was never planned.
Yeah.
In the ways that it developed. There were plans put in place, but they were never fully enacted or fully realised. Yeah.
The ephemera was there at all points.
Yeah. There was a certain... one of the words used by the Exchange was that it was somewhat chaotic and ad hoc. And you can say that about the development of any city over the last 1,000 years. Cities are inherently ad hoc.
You didn't come through the second and first parties. Who backed you?
Cities are inherently chaotic and ad hoc.
Yes and no.
The development of London.
They're certainly written about in a way that's more seems fussy and fastidious with detail, and it comes through. People kind of get this bad idea because of the way in which nobles used to run a number of different cities and the growth of empires, which came with the idea of a city, by the way, which is centralizing a market, which is they get the idea that a lot of things are just officious and easy and they flow through straight money, and some, as we mentioned earlier, some excellent gardener family, maybe in this case, of course, the same gardener family was in the 1760s. Who started Temple Bar again was William
Temple.
It was Sir William Temple, that's right. He was a provost of Trinity College. It was around the 1760s. So a garden family just investing in it, and just pops up, and that's just how it's done. So someone from the elite class, so a proper noble, will become your patron, and then you start your little art group or whatever. And this is the idea. So you're saying it was always ad hoc and a bit mingled with chaos.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that there's actually a misunderstanding with how people do historiography now. So to historicize or to make history now, which is the assumption that there was always a more officious state, or an officious and more easily, it was easier to do. There's always a belief that something was done before you in a very, very quick, like, pebble dash of actions. Like, oh, they threw bricks on top of each other and there was a building, you know, and they got someone to certify it. It's always been this way. They don't understand the history that has to go into it, which is a huge amount of death, a huge amount of failure, kind of concatenization of different things falling into one. You know, like this building collapsed here, but then this building had to pop up to support those other two buildings. So, now you have this building, and the very thing you've been living in is actually a support structure for something else. You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the provost, after which Var was named,
William Temple, yeah.
His successors oversaw the building of the front of Trinity College as it is today. Front Square was built in the 1750s.
Yes, correct.
And that new building for Front Square was meant to be, it was called Front Square because it was meant to be a square.
Here we go again with squares.
And the fourth side of that square, the building materials for that, the provost, I think was the successor to William Temple, I don't think it was him, decided that he would build instead his own house on the grounds of Trinity College. And that's the provost house that you see now at number 1 Grafton Street, across Suffolk Street and Nashville Street from the actual pedestrian part of Grafton Street. And, you know, whenever the plans were originally drawn up for Front Square, that house was not part of it.
Yeah.
that was purely a kind of a dictatorial decision taken by the provost because he had so much power and control within college. He decided, screw it, I'm going to have my house. Yeah. So I think what we're saying is grand designs are often manipulated by a powerful few, but often resented or resisted by the people on the ground who have to live around these grand designs or who are displaced by these grand designs. And that holds true for Temple Bar in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and the idea that central part of Temple Bar would be levelled for the bus and train exchange was resisted because the people on the ground there didn't want it. Grand designs were resisted. You can look at the same thing in Glasgow. After World War II, there were these fantastic, almost kind of dystopian designs for Glasgow that would essentially level the Georgian and Victorian squares in Glasgow. Yeah, a lot of the wonderful architecture around St George's Square, City Hall, I think, was pretty much one of the only old buildings that was going to be preserved. And they even went so far as to have huge public exhibitions, and the kind of the forerunner of public consultation was this kind of expo that Glasgow had in the late 1940s into the early 1950s for these massive 10-15 story high tower blocks in the middle of green squares. So it would have looked very, very kind of Soviet.
That came with a lot of the 70s redesigns of major cities.
Yeah,
including here.
And this was a forerunner to that. And the idea was that Glasgow was exploding population-wise. Lots of Scotland was kind of focalising around Glasgow, and there were these two competing ideas for how Glasgow would develop. One of them, you house everyone in the city centre by getting rid of all these grand, old, inefficient buildings and building these huge, tall tower blocks where you could concentrate people. Now, the idea, ironically, was that even though the people would be cramped in fairly small accommodation and working spaces, there would actually be a huge amount of public space around them. So you would literally have these towers rising up out of large green grassy squares. And the entire city centre was meant to be a kind of grid of these squares, with these almost like teeth or fangs coming out of the ground. Or the other idea was that you kind of dispersed and had these kind of commuter sleeper belt towns around the edge of Glasgow. And Dublin's kind of between those two in some ways.
Completely.
In that we never had high-rise, but we never really had proper sleeper towns, and actually that they ended up developing in Meath, Westmeath, Louth, Kildare, because property shot up so much that people jumped an extra 20 miles.
Yeah, they did. I mean, and that also, that also came into play when considering the Dublin renewal, which was to take the Dublin area and completely redevelop it now for more bigger, not just blue chip companies, but also slightly small to mid-sized commercial entities, so they could start buying pretty high rent and definitely higher lease spaces to sell to these growing business districts that were coming around in the area, so they could get hundreds if not thousands of these different business owners to do cultural things, at least on the very, very specific indicative cultural layer of, well, go to a play, have a drink or two, eat some, go to a gastropub, have some burgers, drink enough of this, go to this play, hey, that's all you need. So, and that's usually how it folks around, as well as getting this new concert hall that was coming up too, so they all kind of conjoined these ideas into a big investment, and that was the Docklands Renewal. And Docklands Renewal was then actually set up as an organisation, association, to mediate all of this, and they had to get rid of a number of these left behind either squatters and people living in different types of kind of low, not high rises, but low enough little tower blocks. And you look at Boland's Mill as well around there's a number of different, if you look around Boland's Mill, there's a number of left behind sections of this kind of horrible grey industrious 70s, also looking like mill buildings that weren't actually part of it. They were just different residences that have been completely ejected now, and they rehoused all these people in satellite towns. And satellite towns were, and more cities now really. But the idea of them was to get rid of the overspill and push them out either towards the airport or in towards Meath or towards Kildare, because that's where a number of the commuters are going anyway. So just give them a stopgap in between that's a little bit closer, give them a motorway to better connect them so they get more direction to the city. It was all part of a number of different plans where, again, my 4-year theory goes out the window, because it was actually a much longer process, and it wasn't exactly carried across very well as the years went on, but it's what happened. So
and the idea of decentralized government kind of followed that. Whenever
absolutely.
People realized that in the 90s people were moving out of the city centre, decentralization became one of these massive projects that Fianna Fáil tried to do.
They pushed a number of times right before they left as well. I mean, in 2004 and 5 decentralization came up again.
Yeah. And the idea was that people wouldn't have to drive 50 miles to work, and you wouldn't have this crazy situation where people...
And you wouldn't have to also keep all government agencies that are really difficult to get to like, maybe, say, for instance, get what was it, first charitable status or whatever it may be. You move those commissions out into smaller entities and bodies that can then liaise with the people in different towns and centres and then be part of that, continuum. Yeah. And that was a great idea. It didn't quite happen. The decentralisation was a mess. Really, really didn't help anything. And then if anything, you just created these urban, not high-rise, but these urban sprawl areas full of different crime and disenfranchisement and problems like that, and also discontinuum with the overall market, but just more locked-in nature of different markets, which is why Tala is referred to as like capital of pizzas and things like that, which is really, if you think about it, it's funny, but it's also really horrible to think about that this whole section of people who have their own schools and their own IT college, which is, barely getting accreditation and struggling its way through. I mean, although they give it credit, but it's more of a really like paternal, horrible fucking... I've heard people refer to it like, oh, they're doing well over there, in that really horrible way, which is more just looking down, the very condescending, like, well, they need the patronage.
Oh, they haven't shit themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They haven't it's the same way in which people sometimes it's the same way in which the British sometimes or the British Parliament refer to the Northern Irish government. It's like, here's money this year for not killing yourselves. Thank you so much for not shooting each other. No offense, Conor, but it's a bit like that. It's a little bit like that. It's extremely condescending, and Tala should be a lovely place. And they had lovely ideas behind it. Tala could be so much better than it is. I don't necessarily, endemically, I think it's a horrible idea that it happened in the first place. I'd go back and stop the building of it. But now that it is here, I think there's things you could do with it. And the way people just throw it aside, it's like, oh, it's Tala, California. It's got its own culture. It's got its own
subculture.
Yeah, it's lots of different subcultures. Yeah, of people who really, just consume the lower order goods that are covered and thrown in the light of certain high classy objects, but actually are just, again, cheap rendering. You know how it is. You go to a supermarket, you give someone Ferrero Rocher instead of a Butler's chocolate. It's just a cheap rendering down of things, and that's exactly what these people are usually marketed to and sent to. And I'm not saying they're even different people. They're us. It's just they've been sent out to here and they've developed something a little bit different. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's a good difference. I think it's actually quite horrible. But yeah, this part of Dublin, not Temple Bar, but the city centre, is a thing that's in flux, and we've definitely gotten a bit of the both. We've got a bit of both worlds. Ballymun had high rises, actually. You said we didn't have any. We did kind of have them. Yeah. And they collapsed them.
Because they were hidden because they were out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. But they were essentially coming into the city. They were a section of Dublin City, and they were fucking horrible, and we collapsed them. And then, except for a few tower blocks that remained, I think, which I saw a documentary on that recently, the tower block. And then these people, again, had to all be each other's neighbours, know each other, and then catch the cheaters who would, like, fuck them over or leave stuff in the lift and make their lives more horrible and sort those problems out. And there's a lot of horrors to being bunched up that close together in these conditions that weren't really thought about for more than 8 years. So a lot of them started to meet the problems that buildings usually have when they settle over more than 8 years. I mean, Dublin suffered a lot of these things just in small pockets. So we don't have the same claim that, say, Glasgow very famously did when it wanted to do a total renewal, which is like all tower blocks, all sections. We never did that. We were too split. In many ways, we're actually decentralized in that aspect.
Yeah.
Every time we have an experiment or a change of residential styles, it's something that happens in one pocket and then never spreads. We don't have any follow through, much like in our sports. We don't follow through to the end. But yeah, it's look, I don't want to go any further with this because in the end I'm just going to be speaking fallaciously, and I don't know too much about some of these eras. I know segments, but looking at it now, those quotes I read at the start, it's very grim. It's a very grim look at the way things are in Dublin. But you're saying it's something that comes with all cities. But I think these people are saying something different to what you're saying. I don't think it's necessarily about it's ad hoc and chaotic. These people know that too. I'm referencing, including Frank and the Irish Times journalist. I think it's just that we've done a particularly bad job at facilitating anything other than the short-term gain of very small private businesses and massive private enterprises, and then there's nothing for the middle class. We've completely fucked that up. I think that's what he means, and we've also not reflected that in our architecture. We've not reflected that in our services. So I think that's really what he's getting at, and it's true for me. But I was wondering, what did you think about that?
I think it is true, but I think the difficulty is short-term planning often doesn't work, and you have all sorts of unintended consequences, and you end up dealing in the present day with the problems of 5 and 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But the really long-term plans are actually incredibly difficult to enact. To enact. I mean, if you look at, say, St. Stephen's Green, it's a wonderful facility now. But Stephen's Green over the past 100 years has gone through all sorts of phases. You know, in the 1970s and 80s, quite a few of the townhouses around Stephen's Green actually would not have been particularly desirable. And the area, especially before pedestrianisation of Grafton Street, was not particularly well-to-do. Whereas now it would be seen as one of the highlights of the city. That's very much been a regeneration of the 1990s, as a number of wealthy individuals had money to basically buy these wonderfully historically and architecturally important buildings and fix them up. So, there's the kind of natural dips that different areas go through, and I think the problem is trying to negotiate the crests and troughs the areas go through for City Council to balance that people want areas to improve, but they don't necessarily want private interest to be the ones controlling that. And the difficulty is in City Council because it is the long-term institution. It is the institution that has been here a few hundred years.
They will be the ones who will outlive a lot of these. Yeah,
absolutely.
These businesses and organisations.
The problem is for the Dublin City Council to try and find ways in which they respond to the people that live in the area, wherever that is, without allowing the area to become hijacked by private interests that come in because the property is cheap or cheaper than it's worth or could be worth with a bit of gentrification.
Yeah. It is a continuous battle, actually, it seems to be, for all of humanity, to better allow the majority of the community to have a tannoy or some sort of soapbox that properly affects political change, or to be specific to affect policy, not just for the building of their area, but for the management of the systems and the management of their caretaking. It's a continuous problem. And in some places it's just grown as a wider berth. The distance between the people actually in control and the people and the majority not being heard is growing larger and larger. And I think in Ireland it's not necessarily that that's the case because of any evil doing or wrongdoing, or because of manipulation of a certain populace to only benefit like a certain refined commercial culture. I think that just kind of happened. I think a lot of mistakes led to this. Last week I said that too. I don't necessarily see an evil genius behind this. This is not a Cartesian issue. I think that's the problem with a lot of people. Like if you look at how Russell Brand recently dealt with his standing as an editor for a really important political magazine, and he came in with the same kind of long-winded. He was very well spoken. Again, his verbosity is extreme. He's a very loquacious man, but he spoke foolishly on this with Jeremy Paxman on this line of the conspiracy of the upper elite. You'd be surprised that is there a setting for these people that they see over and over again? Do they come from Eton, and do they come in some places? Do they come from Yale and specific colleges in America and end up in the same Ivy League systems and then know all the friends again? Yeah, of course they do. But do they do that because of like any planned mission to manipulate the systems against all other people? I don't necessarily think that. I think it's just the way in which we work in small pockets as communities, and I think they just happen to have a richer more integrated, more access to the important figures of life, more access to the important families of lobbies, and they just know how to get funding, and they're trained into that language, and that's just the way it is. I don't think it's all epsilon, sigma, alpha organizations cutting their hands and saying, we'll control the state for the next 80 years. Now shake my hand and drink this gelato through your eye. Like, it's not some weird fucking ritual of people that are just conspiratorially taking things over. I think it's a series of mistakes, and I think with Dublin, it's the same thing. I mean, yes, is there behind the scenes brand enveloping? There has been for a long time. Is there possibly conspiratorial stuff going on now on the level of people, you know, working behind the scenes and not being very public, or not being, you know, hiding their mistakes, being unaccountable for maybe even fucking over the exchange and fucking us over? Absolutely, of course there are, but I don't. Well, the lines have to be drawn, and there's an enemy and there's an us and them, and that's just how it's going to have to be. But I don't necessarily want that, and I don't think it's true that these people did so because they started out evil or maliciously wanting to do this. I just think it's just how people are trained in. I spoke about it last week when I said how I talk, or how people talk to in student unions. We're trained into this kind of speech. There's a very particular kind of market language, and we all have it now. And it's all like, how do I navigate through the portals of life and discussion to keep my aims best in measure, but also very, very selectively compromise to other people's aims, but to better my own aims continuously till I get to the best end that it can possibly afford happiness and pleasure for me. And usually people talk about that as Darwinism, you know, it's perfecting, but through language as well as through strength, which is horseshit. It's not at all what the fucking Darwinism is about. That's your cognitive hijacking of what was a natural process. Just because you think about it in your own particular false conscious framework does not mean that's Darwinism. That's not fucking Darwinism. In fact, someone said that to me last week, said like, well, it's just a Darwinist thing to do. And he said, well, what else would I do? And my suggestion is, like, he said, what else would I do? Well, I have an answer to that. What he should do is he should take a lawnmower, turn it on, and put it on his fucking head. That's what he should do. Because the way people try and excuse themselves out of terrible actions.
Ooh, that got dark.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a dark world we're living in. I opened with a dark 2 quotes, Conor.
Yeah.
Look, humans, we always expand out. We always get to the abstruse of human civilization, but in the end, I think we both do that. As much as I'm quite dramatic, I think it's just something you can't help but do, because those problems are written into us now. But to be more present and practical, where does the exchange? I mean, I know now that you guys have been given a building.
Maybe.
Yes, you've potentially been given a building. You have a place to go. So where is that going to be? I know where it is, but I want you to tell me.
Okay. Well, the offer is that we apply for a building on Joy Street. Now, there are still hundreds of empty buildings around them. So I think that, you know, one of the problems that we've seen other groups go through before us, you know, there are no new problems under the sun, and people have been trying to start up all sorts of different social, political, cultural spaces in the UK and Ireland and elsewhere for decades, particularly with the over-privatisation of public space. And the huge difficulty for a lot of them is that they start somewhere, get very successful, get busy, and then get ruthlessly crushed by an older generation. Yeah, and London has seen quite a lot of that. Quite a lot of the areas that 15, 20 years ago would have been quite cool, up and coming. Camden, Notting Hill, you know, the areas that are now kind of mythologized and part of the backstory of Oasis or different films or whatever. These are all now very gentrified, very expensive areas because of the notoriety that they achieved. And once a new generation comes in that's looking for that cool factor but not actually part of it, they tend to push up the price of property and push everything else out. Mm-hmm. I think to an extent that maybe is what has happened to the Exchange.
But you've been given... No, not been given. You possibly are going to be given... Have you named the building yet? Have you named the place?
It's on Joy Street.
James Joy Street. It used to be Corporation Street. Now it's James Joy Street. Yeah, they changed the name. Why not? It's just around the corner from the Arts Council, which I think is part of why they said it was a beneficial thing for you to have it. I think that's part of the promo.
We'll see.
Yes, we'll see. We happen to know someone who's been up there before. I met him in Sligo, and it's Cormac. I can't remember his...
Nolan. Yeah,
Cormac Nolan. He's a really, really lovely guy, and he'd come out of DIT Bolton Street like a number of architects for the last 6 years. Every time they graduate, they come out with nothing, no place to go. They want to have startup groups and start to redesign, usually practical redesigns of bits of the city. His was on scaffolding, using scaffolding to go to like aborted spaces, or as he called it. So he called it something. It wasn't aborted spaces, or he had some name for it. But anyway, using really good terms, using definite kind of speech that political figures would understand. Using survey speech, legalese. No, it was survey speech to say that there's these spaces that have been left behind, and I'm going to rebuild with scaffolding like a cinema. And that was one of his ideas, a moving cinema, something that would benefit the public and that could be seen as an eye catcher and it's architecturally friendly. It's really practical, great stuff. A lot of his friends were doing that, although a lot of them were still in the definite temple, not shed territory of architectural thinking, which is like, I want a long arm out of this arm and I want it to obsolescently fall back into the center like a hairpin and yada yada yada. Oh, is that a phone going? Oh, it is. It's a phone. Right, okay. That's a very interesting person to be ringing me right now. I'm just gonna put that down. That was just Daniel.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we'll say hey later. Yeah, so it was
first time calling.
Let's put him on speakerphone. He would have nothing of input. It would just be hate. It would all be hate. And there's enough hate on this show. It's not enough love, Conor. We're holding hands right now.
That is not true.
Yeah. So if you take how Cormac dealt with the space before, he got a building for about 2 weeks, and it's again very ephemeral. They're given very, very short slots in one of these buildings, and it could be in potentially the same space where the Exchange might get. And he was there, and he dealt very nicely with the local area. He let kids come in, and himself and this other girl were running a SITVAC, is what they're called, situation vacant. Again, vacant spaces, aborted spaces. So what is the name? But Make Do is the company above that he's started himself with a number of other architects, along with Tiger. Is there another one called Tiger Group or the Tiger
Collective?
Tiger Collective, which was separate, but he knew them. And again, Bolton Street DIT and a number of other universities. Well, that's a DIT, but there's other universities too that are ejecting these architects that have no place to go. So they're all kind of joining together now. Yeah. Thankfully, they're joining up as a movement. And he would like children come in and play around with the blueprints and build little Play-Doh units and teach them a little bit of architecture. It was a really cool idea. But I think we're going to probably get in touch with him and also kind of scout out the area as to who else is there. Like, it seems a bit like you're being put out to pasture. Just a little bit.
Yeah, no, the paradox of it is that, most organizations start in the suburbs or in the kind of up-and-coming areas. Stirling Batter, Smithfield, the north side would be where a number of the current crop of major art institutions have started, and they've gone into the city centre. Exchange subverted that quite deliberately by doing something quite small in the city centre to start with and see if that could build. And I think in many ways it actually did become a fairly interesting part of the city centre and held its own within audience capture metrics. Enough people came into the building to justify it being in the city centre. But we've been put back 5-10 years in development and told to start again. Yeah. And to go back to the bottom of the dominant ladder of property development. And every day that you can't really provide spaces, or you no longer have a centralized location, you lose more groups, you lose more popularity and the different numbers and word of mouth advantages, which is the only promotion you really have that came with it. And then even though you have a huge amount of for likes and friends on Facebook and on the page, they're pretty static. Those aren't really figures you can work with. In the end, it's a promotional page to bring the service to them in the sense of letting them know that we're there. We don't make money out of that. We don't get advertising. It's not the kind of business that the Exchange is. It's not a business at all, really. Yeah, no, I think that to an extent, the trap that sometimes groups in the arts or any area of work can fall into is that they kind of tell themselves, okay, it doesn't matter where we are because the right people will get there. Yeah. And the people who know best will find us. And I think Exchange had the opportunity, being central, to be somewhere that people encountered. As long as you're sorry. Yeah. Have some water in a second. Yeah. To be somewhere that people encountered ideas they weren't expecting to walk along and find. Even on Wednesdays, the basic idea of walking past a room where you see anywhere from 20 to 40 or we've had huge numbers in there in a circle. Sit in a circle and talk about how to share a small amount of what we thought and saw as public space. Mm-hmm. And that's really quite a fairly unique idea in Dublin. Nowhere else could you walk through Temple Bar or parts of the city council or the city centre and see people sit in a circle and talk about how to share this ostensibly public space.
Yeah, well, that's a good way of putting it. I think we've talked about this, and we not to say that's too much. We continue to talk about this. It's the Exchange is this thing that a lot of other spaces were like this in Temple Bar a while ago, and it seems to be the last of the remnants of this bohemian community, or at least this flat hierarchical experimental group of arts facilitation that's left from the 1990 era. It seems to be the last of those kind.
Yeah.
And that's the tragic element that needs to keep kind of being hammered home. This is you haven't got it now. This is the concrete theme. If you're not getting it now, because I have established it a lot before.
Yeah.
This is we're the last. The Exchange, and I'll say we for some extent because I still have some application there with this really, but last of its kind. Could be the last of its kind. Of course, there's plenty of other organisations out there that are a bit like it, but we're talking about in Temple Bar or in the city centre, and we're also talking about what it did for kind of urbanites of that area, living urban children, people just strolling about or walking about with nothing to do. It could be the last in the next little while.
And particularly because it was an area that prided itself on being the home for that kind of interesting, quirky, radical...
Well, the language is still there to pride itself on culture. It's there all the time. You just look at promotions for culture.
The language is there, but
the
signage has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now it's all kind of theatre groups, one or two, and like two spaces, but they talk about theatre groups all the time as if they're everywhere. And then there's lots of different cool little advertising quirk things like, look, it's a bacteria culture inside a cell because it's culture night, or bacteria culture. You get it because you're... come to these 6 different places, pay €250 if you want to be on the list. That was another experience that the Exchange had to go through as well, which is culture night all of a sudden being something you had to pay yourself to be on the list of. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was totally bizarre.
Yeah, it was 1 year, and then the next year you can go back onto it freely, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was that about?
Well, not only that, we told them very simply, we're not going to pay. Culture night is happening anyway.
And you were listed on it, if I remember. You were still on the brochure.
Yeah, culture night is happening anyway.
They're still going to tour by here. We'll attract them in, you know.
Yeah, we're not going to pay to be on a brochure.
That you've decided as well to sign us onto in this case. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I got distracted by my phone. But yeah, it's not going to be the last in any great temperance, or I should say it's not... Oh shit, I was going to use some stupid Latin word, but forget the pretentiousness. It's not the last of its kind. But right now it feels like in our life, or in our generation, it's going to be the last of this kind of thing that we've been celebrating. It'd be terrible if it was. It was an experiment. It was definitely, again, part of the ephemera of these different groups, but it doesn't have to die. Usually these things die with the will of the people who are running it, not necessarily even the creators or the owners, just the people who are in it right now. And that's yourself and you know, people like Thomas Stewart, Robert Cafola, Ed Galligan, Jules, sorry, I forgot Jules' second name.
Fitzsimons.
Yeah, Fitzsimons, really. Fitzsimons, it's just Nordy accent. All of you are kind of the Grania and Mary Cullen as well. Fantastic. She's been there for years, and she's also been one of the media and greeters and dealt with been very diplomatic with a lot of people during angry sessions, which happens when we're all dealing together. She's very, very nice. She's definitely been one of the most tempered and lovely people there. Yeah, just a fantastic input of people, and that's in the end. That's where the group we keep going, and their will hasn't died, so they're hopefully going to push on. There have been dropouts, of course, which there always is. I mean, they have other things in life to go to, and as you've mentioned today, someone who used to be an intern at the Exchange, one of the Exchange students that we have from Spain or from Portugal, has moved on to become an intern or a working intern at this film event, isn't it, in Temple Bar?
Happenings.
Yeah, which is
it's actually not Temple Bar. It's Fitzwilliam.
It's Fitzwilliam. Okay.
It's either Fitzwilliam or Dartmouth Square, and then they've some stuff in the Docklands as well.
Yeah, well, Happenings is a cool thing right now. Yeah. It seems to be getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, pop-up cinema over the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've been doing those for a while. Dunleary used to have them as well, just in, didn't it? Just West Dunleary? Or was it West Dunleary? Am I correct? Either way, it was the southern end of Dunleary. They used to have a little square there where they would do open cinemas, like Little Miss Sunshine and things like that. Right. Yeah, years ago. But yeah, it's a great idea. Pop-up cinemas is a really lovely thing to do during the summer. We're coming towards the summer, and I think that's cool that she went there. So people have been involved even with the Exchange and moving on, and that's good. But the will's not dead. You're not dead yet.
Well, the need's not dead yet either. I mean, there were a couple of different generations of people who went through the Exchange, not just as volunteers, but people who used it. And I think, you know, the city centre is still going to be somewhere that could facilitate somewhere like the Exchange, that, you know, something that is relatively open and accessible to people to come in. And I mean, I've spoken to a few people over the 2 months that we've been closed, a number of people have heard about the Exchange for the first time and thought, oh shit, I would like that.
Yeah.
And there have been people of varying ages.
And they jump out the window and they take the pills and they kill themselves, and they're dead now. They're dead now because of you, unnamed person. Could have saved them. We were rehabilitating all these sad people and lonely people. No, that's not. I'm saying that. Connor's not saying that. Go on, Connor.
But people still want somewhere that they can walk in and feel part of something creative and positive and cultural.
You can put whatever words to it. Yeah, and they don't even have to articulate or describe it in that way. In the end, it is a feeling too, and it's feeling we all at. And it was like, this is what integration, I think, feels like.
Yeah.
And you didn't even have to have known or liked everybody there. In many cases, it still had subgroups and subtens, as I said it last week, but they had to reunite under these processes of communication and making sometimes ad hoc arrangements. In other words, you had to contact other key holders or other members of the exchange to run a theatre group, because you knew if they weren't contacted, it would cause fractures. And so in the end, the process of its running forced people to re-engage over and over and over again, which is actually really, really good, because again, you're hijacking their own mental state, which usually is to push towards the comforts of smaller groups of people, but they actually got much more open in their platform. They became much more open to groups.
Yeah, well, I mean, something like Exchange was never, a consensus as a kind of funny double meaning, because in the popular lexicon, consensus is usually prefixed by cozy. So often we talk about a cozy consensus within political parties or within political groups.
Yeah.
And actually Exchange, I think, for it to work, challenge people to get out of cozy consensus and to forge a consensus that looked at difficult problems. Trying to do things the way Exchange was doing them was not the easier option. The easiest option was to be open only 4 hours a day, and to have a very exact plan of what we were going to do.
Never have bans.
Yeah. Don't do anything difficult. Don't try and accommodate people. Don't
let those scummy looking kids in, because they're dodgy. Don't let the dodgy looking, as they would prefix it as well.
Don't be flexible, but at the same time, all of those things were what I would consider worth doing, and a phrase I came across recently was meaningful inefficiencies. Exchange was riddled with
your fucking phrase.
Yeah, Exchange was riddled with meaningful inefficiencies, and the kind of inefficiencies born out of being accommodating and helpful towards people, and actually trying to take whatever idea they had and support them and seeing that into real life and into fruition. And I think the need for that is still going to be there, and the challenge for us at the moment is, okay, we don't have a particularly wealthy array of options before us, but we have to work out a way to stick together as a group of people and find something that works for us. And there can't be a cozy consensus, because the cozy consensus would be
death.
Shit.
It'd be dead.
It looks really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, fuck that.
It would be great to reopen, but oh my god.
I don't know, Connor. It's 8 in the evening. I'm tired.
It's probably going to involve work.
Yeah, I have to write some stuff and get paid nothing. Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Well, would I look like a freelance journalist to you? Get the fuck out of here. Gotta get some pizza. That is an attitude definitely prevalent. Yeah. That in fact did make some members, leave pretty much, which is work, putting through forms. Fuck that.
But the goal is that actually you have something that is really worthwhile, and that is still motivating people. And there's a sense of loss about the old place, but there's a sense of, well, there were some things we could do differently, and if we had a different building or a bigger one, it could be more.
Yeah.
And at that point, people's eyes widen a bit, and they start to look into the distance and think,
"Oh
well,
my god, yeah!
I would like the old thing, but I would also like more."
A veneer floor, you say? Proper wood paneling of the veneer.
Marble.
Marble. Oh, okay. And that's a working toilet, you're saying?
Wooden panels.
And just to repeat, a working toilet. You guys didn't mention that the first time, did you?
Mahogany furniture, really?
Yeah. Oh, no, not really. Okay. You're going to burn it.
A hall of mirrors.
Plato's Cave? Oh, okay. I don't know what that is, but is it cool?
Angels in the architecture.
Augustinian death. What does that mean? Oh, okay, sure, whatever. I mean, do I get to join? Oh, I can join. Excellent. See, these are the first time reactions from two characters that myself and Conor can't create without immediately injecting our own stupid fucking lives into it, or our own thoughts. But that's the kind of characters we see perceiving a bigger space of the exchange and maybe seeing it as a different thing. And that's another aspect to what we'll be talking about, which is where does the exchange go next? And there is a plan, and hopefully the plan could go through, and maybe it is going to go through, and where you guys go next, if it's bigger, if it's better, if you can define yourself differently, if you can roughly maybe shape up the brand a little bit or change. Just even changing logo colors, it could just completely revamp and play on this Pierre Nora event thinking of society to forget the past really easily and see a new image. Yeah. You could easily rebuild yourselves and then regalvanize the audience and also galvanically pull in a new type of cater a new type of artists and creatives in the city who are now coming out again. So yeah, you could completely do a 180 on this. You can turn back the other way, but be something completely different too. You know, I was going to say 360, but then you're back at the start.
It could be a pet store or whatever.
Yeah, it'd be a pet store in the day.
The options are totally limitless.
It's more that you can change a lot of what you wear. This is just in the history we're talking about now. Is not too deep for the Exchange. Really, it's got a very, very short history. As we talked about before, I've said this. There's no institutional memory in the Exchange. That's one of its biggest benefits. Yeah. It lacks institutional memory, which scares the shit out of a lot of people. But it doesn't have. Don't worry about that. That's just a banging on the door. I get angry sometimes. It has. It doesn't have that, so you don't have to deal with teachers teaching the same problems onto the next set of kids. You don't have the problems of didacticism spreading this disease of warped intelligentsia, crippling and drippling down into each different group with no sense of discovery learning or access to a wider kind of identity through learning. There's none of that because, let's be honest, colleges are fucking that up massively. So, I know for myself, certain people in my life right now, it's like, learn this really annoying thing about Burr's French cinema. I was like, is it important to knowing about World cinema? No, just learn about it because I like it and I'm your lecturer and go learn about it. Yeah, exactly. I'll decide whatever you learn in this course because I'm massively pretentious. Listen to me for 2 hours while I watch this piece of shit movie. Like that's really what a lot of it is. I don't give a fuck how they feel they're important. They're not contributing to the learning process of the individual. They're contributing to the learning process of this Prussian idea of collectivizing these people into one fucking mold of an exam. There's a big difference. I don't care how many times you've heard that, you're going to hear it again. Time for a change. So this is the Exchange now, and it doesn't have a great history, and it can change really, really easily. If you get a bigger space, you can quickly change the theme of it, the feel of it. It could be so much cooler.
Well, I mean, the I suppose Jules talked quite often about a method by which people were kind of learning was the kind of. There are two ways of trying to learn. You're trying to learn a skill to do something quite technical. You can either try for a long time to do it really well, or you can try over and over and accept that you're going to make loads of mistakes, but that you will learn how to avoid mistakes by doing something over and over again. Mm-hmm. And one of the advantages of Exchange was the quick turnover in function, and having so many different groups use the space meant that whatever problems there were with one particular group or one particular event or exhibition, you could learn the lessons from that, and that would be a fairly self-contained project or event. Yeah, they're gone the next week.
A little Star Trek episode you can apply to the next one.
Yeah, you start again the next week. So I think
new moral dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the Exchange is kind of rootless in ways that many other institutions would be terrified at the idea of moving. And while there is a certain amount of terror at the prospect of moving, we're also thinking, well, actually, we could move. Starting again every week translates relatively easy into starting again somewhere else. And the ideas are mobile and can be moved to somewhere else, and it's possible.
Okay, well, I think we can call that then the end of episode 2 of Silent Running. Episode 3 in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have probably another guest on the show, but also we're going to have a lot more kind of research with what we'll give you a little more insight into why we're in the National Library and wearing these stupid chains around our necks. These little ID badges. I love them. It makes me feel like a citizen journalist. Makes me feel so cool.
So you're going to flash them the next time Obama comes.
Absolutely, yes. Whoa, I have questions for Obama. It's like, you have a library question? For Mr. Obama, do you? Oh, okay. How important of you. All right, so I think that'll be all for this week. What was the suggestion you might have for next or 2 weeks from now as a guest, though, just before we go? Any mentions of names you want to talk about now, or we'll leave them?
Hopefully one of the other volunteers. Jules potentially.
It'd be great to have Jules.
Or some of the interns and volunteers who've come to Ireland from abroad and stayed beyond their tenure in the Exchange because they liked Dublin, and there was something about the Exchange that they found a really interesting and different way to kind of plug into a city and get to know some of the people there.
Yeah, and maybe at some point as well we'll bring in someone with contentions, maybe. but for the most part, it's Exchange wankery, which is great. I'm really enjoying it. Okay, thanks very much, Conor. Thanks to myself, and I will speak to you in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.